Bernie Sanders, 83, appearing at Coachella over the weekend, fresh off his big Los Angeles rally where, alongside Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they played to 36,000 with his Fighting Oligarchy tour. Back on the road, they're barnstorming an angry and frustrated nation. Bernie's Los Angeles appearance was one of his few blue district stops, as Bernie and AOC target purple congressional seats for the upcoming 2026 midterms, which are sooner than you think. You cannot overestimate the importance right now of Bernie and AOC, as well as Coach Waltz, hitting the campaign trail this early in the election cycle. Now, I voted for Kamala Harris, and her decision to pick Coach Waltz as her running mate told me that while she was playing to the center, just like Biden did in 2020, she would end up governing much farther to the left than she was willing to let on, just like Biden. So these rallies, the size of them this early tells me the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is taking back the power it had during Joe Biden's first 2 years in office. Don't forget, Biden won because of Bernie and because of people like AOC. And after Biden won, he was beholden to Bernie, which is why Biden passed the most progressive legislation since LBJ, possibly FDR. Kamala lost partly because she didn't want to be seen with Bernie or AOC. She wanted to be seen with the billionaire Mark Cuban. She wanted to be seen with establishment Democrats like the Clintons, the Obamas, Bruce Springsteen, or Oprah. And that's how you lose. Kamala's mistake is that she thought star power equaled votes. Just because Bruce Springsteen, Beyonce, Bon Jovi can fill gigantic arenas, that doesn't translate into votes. According to Newsweek, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, a dyed-in-the-wool conservative Republican, Chris Christie has seen Bruce Springsteen live in concert at least 150 times. Chris Christie has an insatiable appetite for the music of Bruce Springsteen, just not the lyrics. You know, it's people separate the people from the art. I can watch Godfather 2 despite knowing how conservative the actor who played Tom Hagen is. Robert Duvall is very conservative. I can still enjoy his performances. It doesn't mean I'm going to vote the way he tells me to. The energy we saw in those packed arenas coming out to see Kamala didn't translate into votes. 3 million fewer Americans voted last November than they did in 2020. Where was all that energy? It was in the arena, not at the polling station. The size of those crowds didn't translate into votes. Crowd size doesn't mean anything unless the crowds are gathering for something specific. For example, the Black Lives Matter protests were specific. And some can argue, I will argue, that the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 were as powerful, almost as nation-changing as the civil rights movement of the 1960s. At least it's very close. Because it is now settled law in America that we have a serious problem with the police. It is now settled law that there is a two-tiered justice system in America, and Black Lives Matter. It's because of Black Lives Matter, mostly. You will not get any argument from either side of the aisle when you say there's a two-tier justice system. In fact, that's how Donald Trump got elected again, by talking about the two-tier justice system, by attacking the FBI. Partly, all of this is partly, if not mostly, thanks to Black Lives Matter protests. we have a majority of Americans, more than a majority of Americans, Democrat or Republican, who agree law enforcement can't be trusted. Unlike Black Lives Matter, unlike Bernie and AOC right now, Kamala's rallies were joy over substance, kind of like Cory Booker's filibuster. Now, I am from New Jersey. I've met Cory Booker. I love Cory Booker. His story, how he became mayor of Newark, living in the projects, he deserves to be president. He does. He deserves to be president, and I would be the first one to vote for him. About 2 weeks ago, he broke Strom Thurmond's record for the filibuster. But say what you will about Strom Thurmond, at least his filibuster was about something. Strom Thurmond was blocking passage of a piece of civil rights legislation. Can you name the piece of legislation Senator Cory Booker was blocking with his filibuster? That's what the filibuster is for, to block a specific piece of legislation. What was the legislation Cory Booker was blocking? There wasn't any. There was no legislation. It was purely performative. Cory Booker used the filibuster to trash Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And yes, it was effective. And yes, I love him and I would vote for him in a heartbeat when he runs for president. But this is the problem with my party. Cory Booker's filibuster was about the filibuster. The same way Marsh McLuhan said the media is the message, Cory Booker used the filibuster, a tool, a means, as the end. The filibuster for Cory Booker was only about the filibuster. Yes, it was what we needed, but not really. It was mostly performative. Now, did he use any of those 25 hours to outline what he actually stood for? Maybe he did. I barely saw the filibuster. I read about it, but tell me in the comments section if you disagree with me. Did Cory Booker, who I love, did his filibuster have substance? Did he address what the American voter wants? Did he address what the American voter needs, whether the American voter even knows they need it? Because that's what real leadership is. Leadership is telling the American people what they want. Do you for 1 second think Donald Trump's voters want tariffs or a tax cut for the wealthy? Do you think Donald Trump's voters want to fire half our federal workforce? They would support the complete opposite if that's what Trump told them they wanted. Real leaders in the Democratic Party who want to create a permanent majority, winning election after election, right now they would be calling for an increase in the minimum wage, free universal health care, not health insurance, free universal health care, free tuition at all public universities and community college, free child care. They would be calling for 5 million free and or affordable government-built housing units. 5 million government-built housing units. That would lower the cost of purchasing a home or renting one for everyone in this country. Because by increasing the supply, you decrease demand. That's what America wants. They want free breakfast, free lunch, and free dinner 365 days a week for every student in America, no questions asked. You know, Coach Waltz, Kamala's running mate, as governor of Minnesota, he gave students free breakfast and lunch all year round. During the summer, it didn't matter if school wasn't in session. If you live in Minnesota and you go to school, you get a free breakfast and lunch, no questions asked all year round. Did we hear anything about that? Did the free breakfast and lunch make it to the Democratic platform? No. No specifics. Just generalities about affordability. Yes, I cannot cast my ballot. I cannot wait to cast a ballot for affordability. Affordability. Unless and until Democrats are about what I just mentioned, unless and until they are for what I just talked about, unless they're for what I just talked about, they're for nothing. And that's the difference between the massive rallies we're seeing right now for Bernie and AOC. That's the difference between the Bernie and AOC rallies and the massive rallies we saw for Kamala. The difference between Bernie and AOC and Cory Booker's filibuster, which was just about the filibuster. Kamala's rallies were about the rallies, about the joy and the energy. Can you feel it? It was, as they say on Madison Avenue, all about the sizzle, but not the meat. I would vote for Kamala Harris in a heartbeat, but this is why she lost. You have to be for something, unapologetically. For example, I am for bringing back the draft. 99.999% of my listeners, my friends, disagree with me. That's fine, but you know what I'm for. Doesn't mean I'm going to get what I want, but it tells you who I am, what I believe. You have to be for something. Bernie and AOC are for something. They tell you what they want. And they're not asking you, Bernie and AOC, they're not asking you to believe we can achieve any of what they want overnight, if ever. Bernie Sanders wanted Build Back Better. That was his bill. He got the Inflation Reduction Act instead, a shadow of his sweeping, transformative vision for our nation. He said, is the Inflation Reduction Act perfect? Far from it. But it's a step in the right direction. A step in the right direction. And nobody blamed Bernie for compromising when the time came to vote for the Inflation Reduction Act, because he has a moral compass and knows how to take a step in the right direction. We never doubt what Bernie wants and what he's for. Politics is the art of compromise, which means you come in asking for the entire universe and accept, as a compromise, a few galaxies. That's how it works. If you're young, to my young listeners, when you ask for a raise at work, try this. Go in and talk to your boss and say, I want a raise. The boss will ask, how much? How much do you want? Say to your boss, there's what I want, there is what I think I'm worth to this company, there is what I think I deserve, and then there is what I am able to get from you. If it's an older boss, he might or she might laugh and respect you. Your boss should not be offended by your saying that. And if they are, you should go find other work. Unless, of course, you live in a rural red district where there aren't enough jobs and you can't negotiate because your boss is the only game in town. But assuming you have options, you should say that. And then say the following. Mr. Bossman, Mrs. Bossman, Ms. Bossman, I like this job. I like the people. And sometimes this job is fun. Not always, but sometimes. This job isn't my family, but some of the people here are my friends. Not everyone, but some. So I want to stay here. I really want to stay here. That being said, here is what I think I'm worth, what I think I deserve. And I'm going to tell you. And after I tell you, I'm going to get up and go back to work. And then you come back in 48 hours with a counter offer. I don't want to waste your time or mine right now arguing over my worth. So here goes. I want a 250% increase. That's what I think I deserve. That's what I think I'm worth to this company or country. I want a 250% increase. If you were to give me a 250% increase, I wouldn't feel guilty. I wouldn't stay up all night feeling I took advantage of you. Come back to me in 48 hours with a counteroffer. If you excuse me, I have to get back to work. And you get up and you leave and you smile. Hopefully he or she will laugh, because it is kind of cute if you're young and you talk that way to a boss, or if you're my age and you talk that way to a boss. If you're respectful, if you do it dispassionately, without aggression, if you do it calmly, you might also find security guards escorting you off the premises. That happened to me once, 20 years ago. I apparently menaced my boss by talking calmly while he ranted and raved. And he felt menaced by the fact that I wasn't ranting and raving. And I got escorted off the premises. You are dealing with bosses, and they're mostly sociopaths. But if you have options, if you're not afraid of getting fired, if you're genuinely interested in negotiating a pay raise at your job that you want to keep, if you're working for a boss who you genuinely respect, maybe even an older boss who wants you to succeed, that's how you negotiate a pay raise. Because you're speaking the language your boss speaks. You're speaking raw numbers, no emotions. What am I worth? What are you willing to pay me? The same applies to politics, and it's what Democrats don't understand. In politics, it is the people who are the boss. It is the people you negotiate with. And in many ways, that's what Republicans do, and it's not what Democrats do. Republicans ask for everything. Democrats, or at least the Democratic leadership, is all about meeting Republicans instead of voters halfway. Republicans are playing to the voters. They're playing to the mob. Democrats are playing to the Republicans. Democrats are worried about what Republicans are going to think and say about them instead of worrying about what the voters think and say about them. Like that schmuck, Gretchen Whitmer, the Democratic governor of Michigan, who is a putz. She just met with Donald Trump last week in the Oval Office, thinking she could work with Donald Trump. She was trying to present herself to wealthy donors as a problem solver, a centrist who can reach across the aisle, and instead, what happened? She got dragged into that photo op in the Oval Office where she's standing right next to Donald Trump as he signs 2 executive orders literally punishing any member of his past administration who didn't say the 2020 election was stolen, and another executive order punishing the law firm of Sussman Godfrey for representing Dominion voting systems in its $1.6 billion defamation lawsuit against Fox News, which Fox settled for. I think it was like half of that. I think Fox had to pay $750 million. And Trump signed an executive order punishing the law firm of Sussman Godfrey. So Gretchen Whitmer was in the Oval Office as Trump is signing those executive orders. She's obviously running for president, but before she's even an official candidate, she positioned herself inside the Trump White House on purpose, purposely putting on display for wealthy donors her willingness to work with fascists as opposed to defeating them. That might please the wealthy donors. That might please the never-Trumpers. But that's not how you win elections. Gretchen Whitmer cared more about what Trump and the Republicans think of her, what wealthy donors think of her, than what her own constituents think of her. How stupid can Gretchen Whitmer possibly be thinking Trump can be appeased, that she could work with Donald Trump? Again, this is the problem with establishment Democrats like Gretchen Whitmer. But I like Gretchen Whitmer. Of course you do. You like her. You like her, but not her policies. Does anybody really like Bernie? Do you really? I love Bernie, but he's only lovable because of what he stands for. Gretchen Whitmer thinks it's all about winning the money primary. It's all about what wealthy donors need to see instead of what the American voter needs to hear. When Joe Biden was in trouble back in July, about to quit, but fighting for his political life, promising a wealth tax, by the way, he went out to campaign in Michigan. And Gretchen Whitmer, the Democratic governor of that state, she didn't greet him. She didn't campaign with him because she was visiting Sun Valley, the summer camp for billionaires, trying to win the money primary, trying to convince wealthy donors that she'd make the perfect substitute for Joe Biden, not Kamala Harris. Joe hadn't even dropped out yet, and she was already trying to raise money. The Allen and Company Sun Valley Conference is held every July in Idaho. It's where your enemies gather. It's Silicon Valley, Hollywood, and Wall Street, meeting with politicians. Yes, they're strong on social issues like same-sex marriage and abortion, and really strong on income inequality. And by that, I mean they want more of it. They want way more income inequality. Here's a general rule of thumb. Any politician who shows up at Sun Valley is your enemy. Not somebody you're not going to vote for, your enemy. You won't see Bernie. You won't see AOC at Sun Valley. There has to be a dialectic in politics. I'm not saying billionaires should be arrested. I just say they should be eliminated. There should be no billionaires in this country. That's what one side has to say. So there's a dialectic. You can't have both parties celebrating billionaires. Gretchen Whitmer, the Democratic governor of Michigan, flew to Sun Valley while Biden was drowning. She flew there to tell the big money donors, I'm available if you want to dump Joe. She did that instead of appearing with our president in Michigan while the entire Democratic establishment turned on him. Mostly, as I'm reading, mostly because of mental deterioration, stuff that I wasn't willing to admit, but also mostly because he was catering to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. He was talking about a wealth tax. So, look, maybe he had to go. But if you're the Democratic governor of Michigan and Joe Biden, your president, is campaigning in your state, you greet him at the airport. You hit the campaign trail with them. You do not fly to Sun Valley convincing billionaires you can do the president's job. So Gretchen Whitmer, she went to the Trump White House last week to prove I'm presidential material. Instead, she proved the complete opposite. She allowed Donald Trump to drag her into a photo op, and she tried to hide. The pictures are kind of funny, but instead of hiding, what she should have done, if she wanted to prove she was presidential material, what Gretchen Whitmer should have done, as she got tricked by Trump to attend the signing of two executive orders. She should have either left the room or she should have said, Mr. President, may I say something? And he would have said, go ahead. She should have said, I came here, Mr. President, with all respect. I came here to discuss manufacturing jobs for the state of Michigan. I didn't come here to attend your signing of an executive order, two executive orders specifically designed to punish people who spoke the truth about the 2020 presidential election, which you lost no matter how many lies you continue to tell. That's what she should have said. Instead, Gretchen Whitmer cowered in the Oval Office as Trump signed those two executive orders, one to punish past White House employees, another to punish the law firm of Sussman Godfrey for speaking the truth, for saying that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. And throughout that, she remained silent. She's automatically disqualified from even being governor of Michigan now. But I like her. Of course you do. Bernie doesn't have to be likable. Bernie doesn't have to be cute and cuddly. Again, this is what's wrong with establishment Democrats. The further MAGA drifts towards fascism, the further establishment Democrats meet them halfway. At some point, you have to be for something unapologetically. Now, again, I believe in mandatory military service. I do. When Americans turn 18, 2 years of mandatory military service in the armed services. If you're a conscientious objector like me, 2 years of mandatory service anyway. Everyone has to serve in our military. That's what I believe. Everyone disagrees with me. Everyone, even I disagree with me. But that's what I believe. And no matter what I hear to the contrary, nobody has convinced me I'm wrong. I also believe it should be against the law to eat meat or dairy. That's what I'm for. I also believe you can run for office telling voters, this is what I want. This is what I'm for. I recognize most of what I want will never happen, but these are my moral compass points. Because when you run for office and when you govern or try to govern, you have to be for something other than winning and then getting reelected. You know what Donald Trump is for. Himself. His voters vote for him because he has declared, just like Louis XIV, King of France, I am the state. That's why he won. I am your retribution. He actually said that. He said, when they come for me, they're coming for you. Of course, it's psychotic, but at least you know what Donald Trump stands for. Sadism, greed, and revenge, deporting 14 million undocumented Americans. He said He was going to do that. Massive tariffs. He said he was going to do that. Eliminating the income tax. He said he was going to try to do that. Shutting down the regulatory powers of the federal government. You knew what he was for. You knew what Trump, when he was running for president, you knew what he would at least try to deliver if you elected him. What was Kamala for? Trump supporters will never blame Donald Trump for not keeping all his promises. They will only blame Democrats for thwarting him. You have to make promises. Big, bold promises. Even promises you can't keep, because at least it tells the voters who you are. You know, my father kept promising me a puppy. He never delivered. But he kept promising me a puppy. I was convinced I was getting a puppy, and he lied to me. He said, we're getting a puppy, just be patient, we're getting a puppy. Never got one. But at least he knew getting a puppy was the right thing to do. So he lied to me. That was his moral compass. Lying to me about getting a puppy. And he also knew I was lying when I said I would walk the puppy and clean up after him. My father knew early on that he made the mistake of raising a prince. I was raised to be a prince without a country. If I was seen reading a book, I didn't even have to flush my own toilet. He's reading. Don't bother the prince. He's holding a book. My father knew if he got me a puppy, that would end up being his puppy. He knew the puppy needed walking, and it would be, sorry, Dad, the prince just took Profiles in Courage out of the library. The prince must not be interrupted with such quotidian responsibilities as cleaning up after the dog. My father knew what he had raised. So he lied to me and said, I'm getting you a puppy. But at least I knew that he knew the right thing to do was to not raise a prince and get a puppy. Democrats have to be for something. Read the Democratic platform from last year. It's everything voters didn't want. Everything. Read the platform. Voters don't want a public-private partnership providing affordable health insurance. They don't want a public-private partnership making insulin affordable. A public-private partnership making childcare and college affordable. A private-public partnership. A private-public partnership. Affordability. A private-public. Private-public partnerships are just another way of saying, let's give tax dollars to a corporation so they can reap windfall profits while providing as little as possible to the American people. That's why the Democrats didn't win the House. That's why they lost the Senate. That's why they didn't win the Oval Office. During his second inaugural address, Bill Clinton on January 23, 1996, declared, "The era of big government is over." Yeah, thanks. That's 15 years too late, Bill. 15 years earlier, Ronald Reagan ended big government. During his inauguration, he said, in 1981, January of 1981, Ronald Reagan said during his first inauguration, government is not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. Government is the problem. That is who the Republicans are. That is who the Republicans are. They worship at the altar of Ronald Reagan, who said on day one, Government is not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. So as Trump and Musk wage war against our federal government, let's look at how big the federal government actually is. This is going to be, there's some math involved. So I apologize, but it's interesting. We did some research. In 1981, Ronald Reagan became president. He declares government is the enemy. Meanwhile, he's racking up huge budget deficits, but he reduced government services. And that has been the story of our government, Democrat or Republican in charge, ever since. Or at least until Joe Biden got elected. Joe Biden changed this. It's one of the reasons the Democratic establishment got rid of him. Now, government has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, while the deficits grow larger and larger and larger. Okay? The problem isn't big government. The problem is incredibly small government. We don't have enough government. For example, in the 4 years preceding Reagan, from let's say 77 to 81, President Jimmy Carter, in 4 years, created 3 cabinet-level agencies: the Department of Energy, the Department of Education, and FEMA. Since Ronald Reagan took office in 1981, how many government agencies have been created? Would you like to venture a guess? In the nearly 45 years since Ronald Reagan declared war on government, how many new agencies have been created to address the changing needs of our people? If you don't count agencies that have been renamed and folded into the Department of Homeland Security, none. What we've had, the only thing you could, if you were to correct me, if you want to correct me, and these aren't agencies, you have the United States Space Force that was established by Trump in 2019. Yes, that's still around. And you have the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is it's a bureau, not an agency. There's a big difference. And that was set up in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, when capitalism literally died. Since Reagan took office, despite all the changes in the world, not a single agency has been created to address any of all these new problems that pop up every day with rapid change. Again, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is a bureau, not an agency, and Trump is trying to eliminate it. How big is this government? How big is it? When Reagan took office, 2.8 million people worked for the federal government. Today, not including the military, it's 3 million. This is an annualized growth of 0.15%. The size of government since Reagan took office has grown 0.15%. Over the course of 45 years, the size of our federal government has grown 0.15% per year. When Reagan took office, the size of the American economy was about $3 trillion each year. And I'm going to say our economy today, our GDP, before the tariffs, before Trump took office, let's say 26 trillion. Okay? Reagan in 81, it's 3 trillion. Our economy now, I'm going to say 26 trillion. It's grown on average since Reagan took office about 5% a year, while the size of our government has grown 0.15% per year. When Reagan took office, the nation's population stood at 225 million. Today, 350 million. The American population increased by roughly 56% since Reagan took office. But we pretty much have the same number of federal employees. In 1980, right before Reagan took office, and this is where the rubber meets the road, and you really need to pay attention to this no matter how boring it is, and I know it's boring. When Reagan took office, the Internal Revenue Service, happy tax day by the way, the Internal Revenue Service had about 86,470 employees. When Joe Biden took office, the IRS had 80,000 employees. There were 6,470 fewer IRS employees when Joe Biden took office than when Reagan took office 40 years previously. Was it 40 years? 80? Yeah, 40 years. Now, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, it's about 100,000 working at the IRS, but Musk and Trump are paring it back down. I know this is boring. In 1980, the Internal Revenue Service had 86,470 employees to process 93 million tax returns. 40 years later, in 2020, by the time Trump left office, they had 80,000 employees to process 170 million tax returns. This is what is known as the tax gap. So when they keep talking about, we have to slash Medicare and Medicaid and you have to work for food stamps, that is just all, again, it's the closeted gay man who doesn't know he's gay but tells his wife, I don't want to have sex with you because you've gained too much weight. They're not talking about the real elephant in the room. The tax gap. The tax gap. Some people inside the IRS right now estimate that as much as $1 trillion a year goes uncollected because our government lacks the employees, the resources to collect. So let me ask you, given what I've just told you, if anybody's still awake, is government too big? Has it kept up with our growing population? I think it's fallen perilously behind. Government is too small. And yet, our debt spirals out of control. Why? Because we don't have enough people working for the IRS. Just hiring more employees at the IRS would add as much as $1 trillion a year to our budget. That's why the debt is increasing. It's increasing because rich people, since Reagan began selling supply-side economics, they don't pay their fair share of taxes. That's what's driving up the deficits and decreasing the size of our government. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. We can't afford it because you won't hire IRS agents to collect what's owed to us. Government is way too small. And one could argue, given how much our population has increased over the past 45 years, same number of people work for the government, an argument could be made that government is not only too small, in some cases non-existent, like in New Orleans in 2005 after Hurricane Katrina. We don't have an immigration problem. What we have is a shortage of immigration judges. If we had enough judges to process these migrants, we could get those migrants to where they're needed, to the thousands of mid-sized communities sprinkled throughout America desperately in need of not just workers, but people. We have ghost town after ghost town begging for people, literally paying people to move there because these ghost towns need people to keep the local businesses alive, to pay taxes, to keep the schools open and the roads paved. And yes, we have 350 million people living in this country. It's not enough. This is a big country with wide open spaces and empty town after town. So government is just not unresponsive because it's gotten so small. It's also worth asking the question, do we even have a federal government? I mean, obviously we do, but I ask, do we have a federal government the same way I ask, do we have a minimum wage? Yes, of course we do, but do we? The minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It has not been raised since 2009. By law, employers must pay a minimum of $7.25 an hour. Do you think we have a minimum wage? It hasn't been raised since 2009. $7.25 an hour. If you work 5 honest days a week, that's 40 hours a week. That comes to $290 a week. Let's say $300 a week. I'm feeling generous. That is $1,200 a month. That is, if you work an honest day, you make $1,200 a month. Now, I'm old. I see the number $1,200 a month, and I think, well, that's a lot of money. $1,200. I see that. I go, it's a sense memory from childhood. You see $1,200, and you go, that's a lot of money. It's poverty. It's homelessness if you have an extra mouth to feed. So my question again is, do we have a minimum wage? If the minimum wage has stayed the same since 2009, but inflation hasn't, do we still have a minimum wage? Republicans have been against the minimum wage since Roosevelt signed it into law. They never like to say that out loud. Herschel Walker did in 2022 when he was running for the Senate. He said we should get rid of the minimum wage. What he didn't understand is we already did. Taxes are due today. It's the 15th, right? Almost the 15th. Do we have an Internal Revenue Service? Yeah, for people like you and me, but to the richest 1%, to the billionaires, do they have to pay taxes? No. Because the Internal Revenue Service is outgunned. Billionaires hire lawyers and accountants who devise elaborate tax avoidance schemes that the IRS knows are impossible to untangle without more employees. It's why poor people are more likely to get audited over the earned income tax credit than billionaires are for hiding millions and millions and millions of dollars from the government in plain sight. It's all done in plain sight. As I said earlier, as much as $1 trillion a year goes uncollected. Donald Trump has been in a permanent state of audit since he was born. Rich people don't pay their taxes. And people who pretend to be rich, like Donald Trump, don't pay their taxes. They negotiate their taxes. They say to the IRS, okay, you claim I owe $10 million, I'll pay you $2 million because I have lawyers and accountants who will drown you in paperwork and lawsuits. It's not worth the government's time. You don't have the lawyers and the accountants to fight me. So the IRS settles with the billionaires for pennies on the dollar, while you and me, well, the government will just seize our bank accounts. They'll just come and get it. So, it's tax day. Is there an Internal Revenue Service? Yes, for you and me. But for the richest 1%? Sort of. Not really. And that brings me to taxation without representation, since most of you are filing your taxes today. Do we have taxation without representation? This is going to get really dull, and it involves math. So you may want to stop listening because it's going to get really boring. It's math. Taxation without representation. The House of Representatives. Now we have Congress is made up of the Senate. There are 100 members of the Senate, two senators from each state. And then you have the People's House, the House of Representatives. We only have 435 members of the House of Representatives. Not enough. In 1980, a member of the House represented 500,000 constituents. Today, that same House member, because of population growth, each House member now represents 805,000 constituents. That's one of the many reasons you don't get your House member to return your calls or answer your letters. The number of House members is locked at 435, not because of the Constitution. That number is arbitrary, or at least it's not specified in Article 1 of our Constitution. Article 1 of our Constitution is Congress, Article 2, the President, Article 3, Supreme Court. Congress arrived at 435 when they passed the Apportionment Act of 1911, where Congress set the number of House members at 435. They could have set it at any number they wanted. They picked 435, and that was more than 110 years ago. Members of Congress and our president, they signed this law deciding that this is a big country. And in order to make sure all 46 states, I believe there were 46 states back then, in order to make certain all the people were represented in the People's House, the House of Representatives would stand at 435 members. And every census, every 10 years, they would redraw 435 congressional districts throughout the country based on the population shifts. Every 10 years, if Florida gains population and New York loses, then they gain an extra seat and New York loses one. Okay, back then the population of the United States was 93 million. Today it's 350 million. In 1911, when they decided 435 members of the House was enough, it was enough for 93 million people, half of whom, I need not remind you, couldn't vote because they were women. Not to mention, it was the height of Jim Crow, which meant black people in the South weren't voting either. That was 1911 when they decided 435 House members are just enough to represent all the people living in our country. Now, the next year was a presidential election. Would you like to guess how many Americans cast a ballot for president in 1912? Last year, write down your guess. Last year, 155 million Americans voted in the November election. So, second largest turnout. The largest turnout ever was 2020, 158.5 million Americans voted in 2020 to replace Trump with Biden. So, given the population growth, how many votes do you think were cast in 1912 when the population was only 93 million? How many people do you think voted in 1912? 15 million. We have close to 160 million voters. Today, Back then, 15 million. Again, when Congress arrived at 435 as the number of representatives that there should be in the House of Representatives, they only had to worry about 15 million voters. Today, they have to worry about 10 times as many voters. We have 10 times the number of voters for the same exact number of Congress people. Taxation without representation. Still only 435 members of the House. So, do we have a House of Representatives? Yeah, on paper. The same way we have a minimum wage on paper. When you're playing to 800,000 constituents, that's each member of Congress has 800,000 constituents. There's little room for grassroots. You need big money to reach that many people. So the House of Representatives is naturally beholden to big money donors. The House of Representatives is for the billionaires. The Internal Revenue Service, that's for us. Taxation without representation. We had a revolution over that very same predicament. So, I ask you, is there justice in America? We have 2.5 million people behind bars right now. In 1980, 500,000 Americans were behind bars. Today, 2.5 million. That is a 400% increase in our prison population since Ronald Reagan took office. Now, I've destroyed my calculator and probably yours by now, but I'm going to say our entire population has increased by, let's say, 56% since 1980, yet our prison population has increased by 400%. Our prison population has outpaced our own population by nearly 350%. Are there 350% more criminals today than when Ronald Reagan first took office? Yes, but they're not the ones behind bars. I do believe 2.5 million people should be behind bars in this country, just not the ones sitting there right now. Most of them. Some of them deserve to be there. Most of them are nonviolent. Most of them never had a trial. So, I'll ask you this question again. Do we have justice in America? Yeah, we do. The same way we have a minimum wage. There are only 9 justices sitting on the Supreme Court, and it's been that way since 1869. Nothing in Article 3 of our Constitution dictates how many Supreme Court justices there should be. It's decided by Congress. In 1869, when our population was 38 million, Congress decided 9 Supreme Court justices would be enough to accommodate the needs of 38 million Americans. Do we have enough Supreme Court justices? I think the population has grown, and we have increased the number of federal judges. So it's not like our government is totally tone deaf and hasn't noticed that we need more. So if you go back to 1911, when they locked the number of House members at, 435? In 1911, there were 92 federal judges. Today, there are close to 900, give or take. There are 10 times as many judges today as there were in 1911 because our population has increased. We need more judges, certainly more immigration judges, but at least they've recognized there aren't enough judges to go around. 92 judges in 1911, today 900. There are 10 times as many judges today as there were in 1911, so it should only follow that there would be, at the very least, 90 members of the Supreme Court. Nope. Still 9. 9 judges getting the last word on the needs of 350 million Americans. How is that responsive to a country that's growing and changing at lightning speed? I should also add, this Supreme Court under John Roberts, when did he get there? 2005? His Supreme Court takes fewer cases today than it did when Rehnquist was the Chief Justice. So, do we have a Supreme Court? Well, Trump does. Trump has one. The billionaires have a Supreme Court, the same way they have a House of Representatives. What do we have? We have an Internal Revenue Service that makes us pay for Trump's Supreme Court, for his Congress, for his Senate. Do you think you have a Supreme Court? You think 9 judges are worried about 350 million Americans? Kilmar Abrigo Garcia, the El Salvadoran immigrant with protected legal status sitting in an El Salvadoran prison, he doesn't have a Supreme Court. His wife is a U.S. citizen. All 3 of his children are U.S. citizens. They don't have a Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has pretty much ordered the Trump administration to bring Garcia home. Trump is laughing at them. The president of El Salvador visited the Oval Office on Monday, and he lied. He called Garcia a terrorist and said, "Why would I return him?" While Trump just smiled. Stephen Miller, the deputy White House chief of staff, said, "Garcia's a terrorist. We're not returning him." That is a flagrant disregard of our Supreme Court. Let me throw another one to roll around the corner of your brain while you're filing your taxes. Is anybody still here? I don't know. Hawaii was the last state to be admitted to the Union. That was back in 1959. So the population has increased by nearly 98%. The population has nearly doubled since we last added that star to our flag, which means we have 100 senators. Each state gets 2. We have 100 senators spread out over fewer and fewer people. We will never add a 51st state unless it's Canada, which I am all for. I want Canada to be our 51st state. That means 40 million Canadians electing 2 senators, and by my calculation, getting about 50 members of the House of Representatives, because to accommodate Canada as a state, Canadians would be proportioned about 50 House members, same as California, roughly. So yeah, I want Canada as our 51st state. If they're citizens who get to vote, definitely want Canada as our 51st state. And that's why Canada is never becoming our 51st state. For the same reason Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. are never becoming states. So, this country is not becoming an oligarchy. It is an oligarchy. And the truth will set you free. The closeted gay man who doesn't know he's gay, married to a woman saying, I'd love to have sex with you, honey, but you weigh too much. The truth will set you free. It has nothing to do with how much your wife weighs, Lindsay. The truth will set you free. This country has always been an oligarchy. What we've got is fewer, it's getting worse though. We got fewer and fewer people holding all the wealth. And because of the way we designed our political system, fewer and fewer people holding all the power. 9 Supreme Court justices for 350 million Americans. If our population increases while the number of government employees, especially at the IRS, simply stays the same, government gets smaller. If the number of government agencies stays the same, if the number of Supreme Court justices, members of Congress, numbers of states, all stay the same while the population increases, then the power of a select few will grow in direct proportion to the growth of our population. More people, fewer government officials to help them. Government is not just too small. Right now, government by the people and for the people is virtually non-existent. Happy Tax Day. Now, you can change that once you know the truth. Once you know what the truth is, you can change that. But don't wring your hands and say to me, we're turning into a police state. We always were a police state. Now white people are scared. So April 15th, nobody's listening to me. April 15th, big day. One of the most important days on the calendar. Well, should I wrap it up? Yeah, I'm going to wrap it up because I got so many notes here. Yeah, I'm going to wrap it up. Maybe I'll do a show tomorrow. Give money to Bernie. That's my message. Give money to Bernie. I'll probably do, I got tons of notes. I'll probably do, I'm going to try to do a show tomorrow since nobody's watching this one. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Please hit the like button. If you're still watching, please, if all 3 of you are still watching, hit the like button. Please share it. Please leave a comment. There was a lot of math. But I figure you're doing your taxes, so the calculator was out. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room. I have so many notes here to go over. I think I'll do a show tomorrow. All right. Thank you. Yeah. That's how I feel. How you doing, David? Yeah, me too.